Okay, well, welcome everyone to our monthly seminar, London New Finance. This first one is on hedge fund technologies. So our first speaker, Kirk Wylie, OpenGamma.
Can everyone hear me? Is the mic on? Okay, good. So I'm Kirk Wylie. I'm the executive chairman and one of the co-founders of OpenGamma, which is a London-based financial technology startup that does open source risk and trading analytics software. And one of the people we target is hedge funds. But I'm not going to plug OpenGamma for the rest of the talk because it's more interesting to learn some of the things that I've learned from my road through finance and financial technology. As you can probably tell from the accent, I'm not native to the UK, although I am now a subject of Her Majesty. I started my career in Silicon Valley in pure technology, and I moved here about 9 years ago and thought, hey, hedge funds seems to be where all the money is. So I started my finance career about 9 years ago working for a hedge fund called Vega, which at the time was one of the world's largest global macro hedge funds. And I ran, for my sins, the trading and risk analytics software. The $15 billion AUM was at its peak. I joined when it was $6 billion, it got up to 15, and I left when it was 5. So it had a bit of a run there, not due to me. I also worked at a company called KBC Financial Products, and in fact, I reported to our next speaker, Mike Williamson, when he was at KBCFP. And now at OpenGamma, we sell to financial services customers. Most of our customers are, in fact, hedge funds. So although we do work with banks, market infrastructure participants, insurance firms, prop trading shops, most of our customers are hedge funds. So I've been through the entire experience over the last 3 years of attempting both unsuccessfully and now successfully to sell into hedge funds. So the first rule of dealing with hedge funds is that they are incredibly secretive in terms of what they do. It's throughout the entire procurement process. So we can't talk about any of our customers except in broad speaking terms, right? Like we can describe them vaguely. You know, one of them is a greater than $5 billion AUM global macro hedge fund, but that's about all we can do. They don't want people to know what they're doing. And so very often you get to a point where you can't actually speak about your customers from a referenceability perspective in public. They also like to do a lot of their early evaluation in secret. What we found is that hedge funds hate software salespeople, hate them with an absolute passion, right? So they like situations where they can self-evaluate, where they can get, even if you're not doing an open source product, right? We're open source, so our bug tracker's online, documentation's online, software's online, but even if you're not open source, help that self-evaluation phase because they don't want the sales guy to know. And part of that is because they don't have time for a vendor roadshow. One of the differences that we've found between a bank procurement process and a hedge fund procurement process is that very early on in the cycle, a bank will call in the top 10 firms and give them all a 70-page RFP or RFI to fill out. And then after everybody fills it out, then they come up to the next 5, and then they come up to the next 3. So they involve vendors very early on in the process. They have no problem saying, we are HSBC or Bank of America or RBS or JP Morgan, and we are running a vendor evaluation effort. Hedge funds don't. Right? What we've found is that they only alert themselves to vendors when they've gotten to that short list of 2 to 3, right? So being able to support their self-evaluation of going from the 10 names that they're hearing about all the way through to the 3 that they really care about is very important. As well, they don't have the time to run through that 9 to 12 month process. So one of the things when I've given other talks on selling to financial services institutions is when you're dealing with a bank, a 12-month procurement cycle, you're actually doing pretty well. It can take them a year in good times to buy from you. A hedge fund doesn't have that amount of time. In 12 months, their requirements will have moved on. Their AUM may have changed dramatically. The staffing may be different. They tend to compress things down to a much shorter period. And so if you're in the right place at the right time, then you can do very well. Because they don't have time to run through that, here's a 70-page RFI that we know takes forever, so you have, as an example, 45 days to complete it, and you'll get your response from us 30 days after that, right? Hedge fund may have already made their entire procurement decision during that time. So I was just talking about procurement decisions. One of the other big differences is that there is no procurement department. So who here works for a current fintech vendor? Okay, there's a couple of you. The ones that, who here works for a buyer, a bank, a hedge fund, somebody like that? Okay. Whether you know it or not, one of the things that we fintech vendors know is the larger the institution, the more likely there is a procurement department whose job it seemingly is to screw up a well-negotiated deal between the actual consumer of the technology and the people producing it, right? And it's actually gotten to the point where in some firms, luckily I think this practice has been discredited, procurement agents are positively compensated by the discount they can get after the deal has actually been negotiated, right? So if you're in a deal with a large bank and you get to a handshake and you get to a point where the guy that's buying technology from you thinks, I'm getting a fair deal, and you think, I'm getting a fair deal, everybody's happy. Then you have the procurement department that will be compensated by being able to cut 10% off the pre-negotiated amount. One of the nice things about hedge funds is there is no procurement department, right? There is a procurement compliance department. They want to make sure that the legals are in place. Every single contract we have ever had of any kind, whether it's an NDA, in a proof of concept document, or a full-blown license agreement, goes through a lawyer. Very often with a hedge fund, it is not a lawyer well-versed in commercial software negotiations, so we kind of have to explain to someone that does a lot of work based in Jersey and the Cayman Islands trying to minimize tax exactly what's going on in a conventional software agreement, but there isn't anybody there that's trying to renegotiate at the last minute. And lest you think that renegotiation is a joke, procurement departments will know when your sales guy's quarter ends, and they will find out how close they are to meeting quota, and they will find a way of finding out how much cash you have in the bank to push you to the point of bankruptcy to sign a deal that will give them that bonus on that extra 10%. Once the portfolio manager, right, who is the single most important person in a hedge fund, that's the guy that's actually making the trading decisions, once he decides this is the technology choice that I want to make, the entire rest of the organization comes into line and figures out the most efficient way of satisfying the portfolio manager's desires. If you end up in a situation, which we have run into, where you have someone on legal or compliance that's holding things up a bit, a quick email to the PM that you get exactly one meeting with, which is 30 minutes at the most, a quick email to him tends to sort things out very, very quickly, right? That's a great situation, but it doesn't mean that you have to be able to move quickly. There isn't going to be a procurement department slowing things down, but the moment you get the PM's go ahead, you've got to hit the gas and throw everything you have internally at satisfying that contract. And so very often when we're in the last stages of a negotiation, of the absolute last stages where the PM signed off, we'll actually throw up to 5 people on one account, day in, day out, just to give it over that hurdle before the PM gets distracted and moves on to the next shiny thing. So when dealing with technology products, as opposed to other products, I'm on film, so I'm going to use the most diplomatic terms that I can for this. If you consider the bell curve of human performance, right, where you've got the absolute top achievers on this end and the absolute lowest achievers on that end, any financial services institution is going to have a lower threshold that they won't hire below, right? What we've found is that at hedge funds, that threshold is much farther skewed towards the overachievers than towards the underachievers as compared to other financial services companies. What that means is that solutions that are designed for the lowest common denominator, or that are designed for people that may need some help getting things done, often do very badly in selling to hedge funds because these aren't the problems that they have, right? Whether it's traders who, the top N% of traders end up at hedge funds because they earn a lot more than working at a bank, or whether it's techies where the top N% end up working at hedge funds because it's more interesting or they make more money or do whatever. You don't find the bottom ones that are present at banks, insurance companies, firms like that. So if you're coming in with a solution that says, we're going to help the bulk of your people who are not superstars perform much better, that's not a problem that they have at all, right? So targeting hedge funds means that you end up having to have a solution that is almost skewed really aggressively towards that top end of the talent curve, which is not a problem that many other firms tend to have, right? Coming in, and what that means is for a system like ours that appeals to hedge funds and banks and regulators and all sorts of other people, our demo scripts are completely different. What we show when we demo is completely different. We follow a different line because the needs of the organization are different. We can satisfy it from the same set of technology, but we're not going to show the same things in a demo. So hedge funds also have a very unique set of focus points that's partially based on their business model. So a hedge fund earns money two ways. The first is they earn a percentage of AUM every year, and then they earn a cut of the upside that they earn their investors. So it's called a 2 in 20 business. So they get 2% a year just to manage the portfolio, and they get 20% of the upside. That's if you're doing well. Right, if you're Renaissance, you get something like 3 in 30, but I don't think they've ever had a down quarter in their history. If you're a startup fund, you're lucky to get 1 in 10 when you're sub 100 million, right? But that's roughly a 2 in 20 business, which means that when you actually run the numbers, right, at 2% of, let's say, $100 million under management, that's $2 million a year. And that's what the firm has to live on completely. So that's salaries. That's their trading costs. So execution venues, everything else. They've got to live within that $2 million a year. That's not a lot of money. And so you end up with this relentless focus inside of a hedge fund. And I know this from being at one and then selling to them, is if you are dealing with their trades, if you are part of something that the portfolio manager recognizes, then they feel the need to own it completely. And their definition of owning may be that they are going to build it from scratch in software or hardware, no matter what. An HFT shop is going to be buying custom hardware. They're going to be running a custom Linux kernel. They're going to be writing their own FPGA drivers. They're going to be writing their own GPU software. They're going to do everything that touches their moment of alpha, right? But after that's done, they don't care about any of the rest, right? That's not in their focus. If you're dealing with a global macro fund or another type of quantitative hedge fund, they care about the quality of the numbers that's coming out. Right, so if you're dealing with something that tells them what their exposures are, what their what-if scenarios are, what their VAR is, they care a lot about that, and they want to own that in some form. But if you're not dealing with that, they don't care, right? They're just not going to fixate on it at all. Now, that definition of owning may mean that they build everything from scratch. So there's another firm that did some open source work targeting hedge funds called Marketcetera. Didn't end up turning out that well. And one of the reasons is that they were focusing on algorithmic trading for algo trading hedge funds. And what they found is that those guys considered that in the own it category, and they wanted to build that from scratch, right? So it may be that they want to build it from scratch. It may be that their definition of owning it means that they want to run it on site. One of the things that we've been doing at OpenGamma is actually taking people and moving them off of hosted risk platforms to run on site, right? Because that's their definition of owning it. They have control over it, right? But if you aren't touching something that's in that space, they don't care about it at all. It is a pure cost of operations, and they don't want to focus on it. So when you look at a hedge fund as opposed to a bank, the number of programmers assigned to operational functions is radically different. Hedge funds don't have people writing code for back office trade processing if they can all avoid it. They don't have people working on middle office reconciliation. These are all things that they buy in, whereas a bank will typically have a huge, floors of people that are writing software in that because they feel they need to own more of their overall technology stack than a hedge fund will. So what that ends up with is a mentality that anything that you can outsource at a hedge fund, you do. Right? So we've got someone from Fund Apps who's going to be appearing on the panel later on, which is a classic example. It's UCITS reporting software, right? It's a cost of capital. Well, it's other things as well. I'll let him speak about it. But we see a lot of people that in the UCITS space or the MiFID space or the Form PF space, right? Virtually none of the hedge funds are actually building that stuff themselves because it's just something they have to run, but they don't care about it, so they're bringing in another vendor. They're fund administrators, right? Usually a hedge fund won't have its own back office anymore. They'll just use the fund administrator, book trades in there. They may be using accounting software that's hosted. Even portfolio management systems. We're seeing a big wave of hedge funds not even running their core portfolio holding systems. They want that outsourced because that's just something that has to run and they don't care about it, right? So anything that is not part of their core trading methodology, they want to outsource because it eliminates an administrative burden. Now, hosted risk systems is in there for a reason, which is, although we are a risk vendor, and we like people to run risk systems on site because it leads to more deals for us, we don't recommend that every firm does it, right? We actually recommend that when hedge funds are starting out, they use a hosted risk system, whether it's a RiskMetrics or an Imagine or a SunGuard Adaptive or somebody like that, because they still don't own that. That's not in their core competency yet. They need to get everything else up and running. But the moment they reach the point where it is critical to them, then what we found is that they eliminate that and bring it on site. So the difference between a $10 million AUM and a $10 billion AUM hedge fund is very different in terms of what they're willing and what they're eager to outsource. So I believe hedge funds are awesome customers. They don't have annoying procurement departments that slow everything down. They pay on time, usually. If you have contracts that you're fine executing with a legal entity that may be nothing but a number of names and letters that's registered in Jersey or the Isle of Man or the Cayman Islands, they're great because they are willing to deal with English law. They are very often, although not publicly willing to be references, they'll be private references. So all of our hedge fund customers have spoken with each other on the phone, even though I can't name them. But you need to produce technology in a way that's sensitive to their particular requirements, which are different than banks or other financial services institutions, and you understand how to sell to them. So you understand that ultimately your goal is getting that 30-minute meeting with the portfolio manager and wowing him, that your goal is not dealing with a 70-page RFI where you're one of a field of 10, where you're able to hit the ground running and run very, very quickly. Then they are absolutely awesome customers, and it's the best way to engage with them. That's it. Questions? I will be on the panel later on. So,
hi, I'm Mike. I run quantstart.com. I'm interested in your marketing channels. I mean, I used to work at a quant fund, and I didn't know actually how to look for software of that sort. So how do you go about marketing to these very secretive organizations?
So that is probably our single biggest challenge, is aligning our marketing effort and spend to hit the hedge funds that we're interested in. Actually, our head of marketing is in the back of the room here. what we found is that a number of avenues that you would think about trying are ineffective in this space, because if we're targeting a hedge fund audience, we don't want to accidentally give the wrong message to a bank, for example. And so some of the things that we found don't work are conferences. Hedge fundies do not have the time to go off on a jolly for a day or a couple days at a conference. They just don't show up. Even conferences that are targeted at hedge funds, unfortunately, we found are 60 to 70% vendors trying to sell to hedge funds, fighting over the few people that are actually showing up. We've done a lot of modern digital marketing, right? So we use Google AdWords extensively. We use LinkedIn. We rely on that self-evaluation where they're going to start Googling, they're going to start searching. We look through things like Stack Overflow, Stack Exchange. We follow what a modern technologist or somebody trying to learn would go to, which is ultimately the web first, right? They don't start by calling up vendors and saying, come in for a presentation. They want to learn themselves. So it's part of that self-evaluation effort. If you're good at self-evaluation, you'll end up getting good at the digital marketing. But things like conferences, traditional print media, I mean, who at a hedge fund has time to actually read anything? It's just not something that we found actually works. But that whole semi-secret thing means that most of our marketing is done by our clients as word of mouth, right? So one of the things that we do is our open pubs, right? So, you know, pretty much any time you've got a sufficient number of OpenGamma people in a major financial center, we'll buy people drinks. And what we find is that customers, prospects, partners, all these people show up, and all of a sudden, they're telling each other, and the customers are saying, oh yeah, I've been live on OpenGamma for months now. It's unbelievably awesome. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Partners, solution partners are going, oh yeah, we did a project where we did that exact type of thing. Prospects are able to get their questions answered. And often the prospects refuse to tell us who they are. Right? Everybody signs up under a Gmail address. They don't respond to follow-up emails. Sometimes we get a lot of John Does signing up. We have had Mailinator being used as the email address. And yet later on, we've then been in meetings with them a couple months later and be like, I recognize you. You just didn't want to deal with software vendors. So it's guerrilla marketing. It's figuring out what works once you realize that traditional marketing doesn't.
Okay, well, thanks, Kirk. Thanks very much.
Welcome.